And Tim, thanks for joining us here today. Um, I'm pretty excited about our opportunity to talk to Tim here today. Tim has been instrumental with CBTS over the last decade, kind of opening up our practices and our solution sets into state and local government, education, some of those sectors. And so, Tim, maybe kind of introduce yourself a little bit and kind of tell us your background, excuse me, how you got here, and then we'll go from there.
Perfect. Well, I'm Tim Lonsway. I'm the Vice President of Public Sector, and that's public sector is really divided into state and local municipal government, higher ed, everything from community colleges to R1 institutions and med centers, and then K-12s, urban, rural, and consolidation points, as well as quasi-governmentals, airport authorities, transit authorities, retirement pension funds, things of that nature. So my background in technology, and if you're on the video, you can see I've got no hair and a lot of gray in my beard. Over the last 25 years has really been around management consulting. So it's around the technology, less about the technology, more around the human-based outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So in public sector, really for us, kind of the biggest challenge is people aren't buying speeds and feeds. They're not buying CPU cycles. They're really more along the lines of, if it's in government, how do I get reelected, right? Or how do I, if I'm a commissioner, how do I achieve those things that I said I was going to achieve for my constituents? Or in education, really driving, the higher graduation rates or placement rates, into that, and making people more workforce ready. So for us, as a technology fulfillment company, our goal and our challenge is really always to try to understand what those outcomes are, take those kind of core technology SKUs, find the right partnership mix from a product and a services perspective, and then help our customers achieve their goals. And really, that's really kind of where our focus has been, Matt.
Makes sense. That's a slide. Actually, I want to talk a little bit about that, about how kind of sometimes I think in these situations, state government, et cetera, that it's more about the policies and relationships than it is about the technology and how do you get a toehold in there. So I want to definitely come back to that. I think it's an interesting subject. I've got a slide up here that talks about the state of Ohio, and some of our partners here on the phone, on the webcast, excuse me, might know that we supply the entire state of Ohio for their telephony solution, their hosted UCaaS services. And we've been doing that a while. I think, Tim, maybe 6 years now or so. Is that right?
About 8.
About 8. Okay, so longer than I thought. But one of the things I've heard you talk about, particularly, like we had a session earlier about Microsoft Teams and how that's starting to change the landscape, right? And I've heard you talk a little bit about how you're seeing, I've heard you use the term, and I put it on the head of the slide here, the evolution of dial tone, of what these additional kind of collaborative tools or even platforms like Microsoft Teams, how that's changing the value proposition. Could you share with us a little bit of kind of what you're seeing in that space?
Sure. I think a lot of it is, innovate or die type of an approach. And we're a 145 plus year old company. When people think about us as a dial tone service provider, certainly that's an advantage for us. But long ago, we moved away from copper lines and 5 ESS switches. And even recently, we're moving away from IP-based solutions and really looking at, our services as more of an application. So if you think about anything that emanates from the dial tone, anything that we have a right to win or at least a right to communicate around, it really does start with the dial tone. But institutions don't rely on brick and mortar as much as they used to. They've gone from state of Ohio, for example, has 35,000 knowledge workers. But right now, the COO for the state of Ohio is saying if we bring 15,000 of those folks back into brick and mortar, that will be a high number. So they're having to learn very rapidly how to work in a mobilized environment and be able to adapt their behaviors and their work products into the flows of the activities they need to do. So dial tone can't be a phone on a desk anymore. It has to be a mobility type of a solution. And it's not just a client on a phone that says, okay, now I'm going to press this button and I tie it in. So you take that dial tone and then you move it into an agnostic IM&P, instant messaging and presence type of a front end or an application. Doesn't matter if it's Microsoft or Jabber or any other type of a functionality. you still want to connect as a state government. You still want to connect that particular client to communicate with onto a carrier class, highly available, secure, and federally compliant infrastructure to be able to have those communications, to be able to execute their job functions. If you take that then and say the next kind of piece of that is really as you start to move into the collaboration piece and into the web conferencing, really you're seeing a lot of specialization and a lot of drive where it used to be, well, it's Zoom and it's WebEx and it's Microsoft, used to be Skype, now it's Teams, and it's BlueJean and it's GoToMeeting. All of those are generic type of products to say, yeah, you can do web collaboration. In the end, they're kind of for the purposes of government or for the purposes of education. They kind of miss the mark. They're just, yeah, they're sexy because they're sexy, but everybody can do that now. So the new normal is really focusing in on those use cases, and you're seeing differentiation now where Zoom is driving towards education, and that breakout room and those Blackboard sessions really become, where they're invested. Whereas Cisco and the WebEx side is really focusing in on, connected justice, rehabilitative services, community corrections, addiction service counseling, things of that nature. So, that's kind of the third leg of the stool. And then ultimately the fourth leg of that communication stool emanating from the dial tone is really around what we traditionally call contact centers. But it's really not contact centers. It's not a lot of bodies sitting in a bunch of chairs with big pipes sitting in front of, large contact center infrastructure. It's more around human services, human support programs, and how do citizens communicate, leverage those technologies, virtualized assistants, artificial intelligence, analytical reporting, robotic process automation, to create more self-service avenues, decrease the need for people to come into brick and mortar to meet them, really, literally, Matt, to meet them where they live today, which is from their iPhone, from their smartphone. So those technologies, necessity being the mother of invention, is really where we are working with our customers to meet those needs today, to move into those areas that kind of blend technologies and providers to be able to provide those solutions.
I've heard you use the term. More and more of the folks you're talking to in government are trying to figure out how to have no wrong door, that no matter where a citizen wants to meet that employee and that workload, let's figure out both on the tools that employees use and those collaboration tools or specialized tools, along with no wrong door for that citizen to get in there.
I think that's, if you don't mind, no wrong door could be a mobile application, could be a web interface, it could be an SMS chat, could be a phone call, something to those lines. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter. And to our customers, we make sure that it doesn't matter. We just connect the citizens to the programs.
Well, on the kind of the changing workforce where they're working from home, I know just in this last week, right, we've on the state of Ohio, just about 2 hours ago, I was on a phone call. We're talking about how they're going to look at Microsoft Teams, even though we're supplying them with some 50,000 hosted Cisco phones. They want to look at how they also enable Microsoft Teams, right? And on that call, they said that they believe probably somewhere in the 25 to 30% of that workforce is never going to come home again. And that kind of shocked me of how, so I think our partners need to be listening for those kinds of changes in the government side.
You bring up a great point, Matt, because from a partner perspective, certainly, you think of us as being able to provide that dial tone in the traditional method of hosted unified communications. But the reality is Microsoft Direct Route or whatever that client is that sits in the front end, it still plugs into our carrier class infrastructure. We really don't care. And that it really provides our customers a lot of flexibility to leverage maybe existing licensing structures they have with Microsoft or other OEMs to be able to move quickly with us towards the evolution of that.
Now, you talked a little bit about innovation and kind of where these conversations now, if we've got workforces that are moving everywhere, we've got citizens we've got to try and solve in different ways. I had put a slide in here. You guys, I think, did some pretty interesting work with Cleveland. And this was really completely, I believe, if I understand correctly, we developed this application from scratch. So could you share a little bit about what you did up there?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly this is the oldest of the examples we have. This has been in production about 5 years, but really where this came from was the Cleveland Rapid Transit Authority which services buses and trains kind of throughout the Cleveland metro area, had an application that was, was called See Something, Say Something. And it was a text application. So what citizens would see is, I see something bad going on a bus, they would text it in, and it would be a one-way communication. So working with RTA, providing them the unified communications and the contact center solutions that we heard about the challenges that they had. And working with our technology people inside of our organization said, well, we can create an interactive solution. Again, kind of a no wrong door. You want to, we can do a video exchange, we can do an SMS, we can do some type of a chat type of a service, and certainly a phone call. But regardless of how you want to dial 1216 eyes, you'll be able to communicate with us. And then on the other end, we're using artificial intelligence, human managed artificial intelligence to say, what is the challenge? Hey, there's a call comes in or an SMS comes in. I accept the way it's coming in, identify, kind of where it's at. And then, a woman's having a baby on the bus, right? That could be an example, or a drug deal going down, or even as simple as I just got on the train and I can see somebody stalking, the parking lot, where I dropped my car off. Well, those calls kind of they either get answered. Maybe it could be as simple as, I need a schedule for the bus, or I need to make a payment for my next month's commuter fees. All of those capabilities kind of come in and get artificially serviced up front to kind of reduce that load on the back end, where citizens don't need to communicate with a person. They just get serviced, and you reduce the load on the people. Where they do need to get serviced, and it gets routed to the proper perspective. And then through it all, collecting that data and understanding what is happening, providing that analytic dashboarding on the backside allows RTA then to say, this program's effective, we need to do more of this because it helps our citizens and it increases, the number of commuters that we have. This product did not work, so let's do less of it. So it's really taking the technology, taking the challenge that they have and providing e-commerce based intelligence and capabilities to the transit authority. So it's been very effective for us. And it's certainly spawned many other examples of that innovation.
Well, I want the partners, the reason I brought this up is I want the partners here in the webcast to know that if they start to engage in kind of state and local government and they see some opportunities for this kind of innovation, we have the resources to be able to do that. You mentioned analytics, and what it came to mind for me is, I spend more of my time on the commercial sales. You're more in the state, local education area. Analytics sometimes on the commercial side, I hear people talk about it and they want to have it, but I wonder so often do they really use it, because they're in a for-profit business, and as long as the service is working right and profits are up, I'm not so sure sometimes the analytics on a daily basis is as important as maybe they think. But in state government, I feel like, because I've gotten to work with you guys in the state of Ohio a little bit more in the last 6 months, I feel like analytics and the information from that, particularly around cost savings, around calls in this post-COVID world, talk a little bit about some of the value that you've seen in, the right solution, providing the right data to state government, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'm kind of go back to what I said earlier, the first job of the day one of the newly elected governor is to get reelected. Right? It's the same with county commissioners. It's the same with, any public official. So those programs that interface with the citizens most often, like Medicaid, and I'm going to throw terms out there that you may or may not care about, but just know that they're human services programs, addiction services programs. Those are the ones that can have a lot of impact when they're done right. So government throws money at something, but they don't know what happens. Did it work? Didn't it work? It becomes a cult of personality to get refunded. Well, the challenge that or the opportunity that we present with pulling in that analytical data, taking in kind of those traditional things you think of, hey, how quickly did we answer the call? Were they satisfied? Did we complete it the first time? Start augmenting that with, more human data around, maybe the demographics that they're coming from, tie it into some of the case management tools, and you actually can start to trace this individual entered this addiction program. They went through these steps, and they came out the other end, and they've rejoined the workforce. You start to add that data back up, and you start to see patterns, and from there you can start to say, where are we going to reinvest as a program, as a state or a county or a municipal government program? It gives you the intelligence that you need to be able to determine where you want to spend your money and what is going to have the most impact for your citizens. So that's kind of part of what we do. We're not all of that answer, but we tie those things together and provide that information, that analytical data, in a meaningful and an actionable way such that it can be consumed and acted upon.
Well, as you're talking, because I had this slide in there too, and I thought I'd pull it up, is that I kind of put this idea of oftentimes, and it sounds to me like as I've worked with you, that it's about relationships, it's about the policy, it's about helping, people want to do good, but at the same time, these are oftentimes elected officials. And so sometimes it's more about policy and relationships over necessarily technology, because technology in a lot of ways is starting to flatten. And I put this picture right here, kind of a toehold as well, of if you're talking about a policy and relationships, share a little bit your experience of, sometimes I think of, let's say if I'm going to go in, I want to meet with the CEO right now, right? But maybe that's not the best way. Maybe the best way is to get a toehold in other agencies or other departments to build kind of a case for a solution. So can you share a little bit about your thoughts of how you work through that minefield and how you get toeholds in particular, situations like that?
Sure, absolutely. And, you see these in large universities, county governments, city governments, state governments. A lot of times you have a centralized IT organization, and a lot of times they're what's called a $0 cost center. So all of the funding, whether it comes from the state or the students or wherever, goes into those individual groups, and then basically those chargeback for those shared services come back in. So it is absolutely important to kind of understand what that core IT or that core administrative group, what their goals and objectives are, because they're directly aligned with whomever that leader is, the governor, the commissioner, the provost, or the president. They're directly aligned. But to Matt's point, the people that are really influencing what those core IT people are doing are really those edges. Those are it's the college, or it's the Health and Human Services, or it's the Department of Public Safety, or it's Department of Transportation. So kind of understanding and working both from the center and then from the edges towards the center, understanding that symbiotic relationship and how they benefit each other, driving some of that innovation and those needs from the edges based on where that money flows, gives you the opportunity to make that core IT group more attuned with what the needs are of their customers, their internal customers. So when they provide those solutions up, it services not only those people with the most money, but then it can matriculate out, or it can disseminate out into some of those smaller agencies that maybe get neglected along the side. So for us, it's important to kind of work both from the center and then from the edges, because the edges are the dominant influencers, but the core is really the governing body. Is that what you're looking for, Matt?
That's exactly what I was thinking, because as I've worked with you guys more in the last 6 months or so here, I think I've told you this term before. I liken it to a TV detective show where I see a mob board. I see somebody at the top and the tentacles of the people underneath, and I hear you guys talk a lot about who's the organization, who's the leader here, what are their goals, what's that shared area look like, but then what are the agencies? So, I've heard you talk about some things where you're doing something and kind of targeting the county that Cleveland's in, I forget the name of it, to get to get some kind of mind share about a solution that you want to drive farther in the state. So I thought, it was pretty, again, this idea of a mob board, that you had to think about both leadership, but underneath, and how you wanted to get in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say too, for the channel folks, that sounds daunting, but it really isn't, because along the way, you'll sell some other things kind of along the way. And if you've got some dots here that you can connect there, you start to create that groundswell, and that groundswell then becomes, it's almost like critical mass. Like once you get enough of it, it just keeps flowing, right? Because you then become an extension of not only those edge type customers, but also you're a delivery partner for the core IT folks. So it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of effort, but it's not that far of a leap. It's just the difference that we've seen. It's an underserved market. And from being an underserved market, we have the opportunity to shine, because we stand out. We're not just trying to sell, hey, here's a product that goes this fast and it does this bell and whistle. We're not tone deaf. We're attuned to what the challenges are. And when we present those options back, they latch onto us. And then we just kind of continue to go. We become, to your point, we become kind of that point is, hey, where is this going to go next? Help us get there. I could talk to this vendor, this vendor, this vendor, but you guys are kind of where it all comes together and you help us elevate it up. So it is definitely worth the energy and effort. It becomes a recurring revenue stream that can consistently sustain us, over the into the future, and then certainly from an evolution of our capabilities gives us the opportunity to not be stagnant and have our services sunset. We can continue to enhance them.
Well, and I think one thing I wanted to share too, we can't say the name of the state, but working with your team, we got part of an RFP, and we just got a letter back that we've been awarded this 8,000 seat UCaaS opportunity for a state on the East Coast. We're still in contract negotiations, so I can't mention it yet, but it came to us through a partner that had been servicing a section of the state for circuits and things like that, and heard this opportunity, knew some people on the procurement side and the IT, and so that helped us get in there too. So I want the partners here on the phone to know, or excuse me, the webcast, to know that if you've got those kinds of relationships, we're more than happy to engage as well to kind of talk about how we might expand on those, look at RFPs, those kinds of things. So.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I could. The partner community to me is just an untapped market. We have the team that I support, my team. This is all we do: education and government. That's all we do. So we speak the language. Yep. We're working the networks. We're driving the contractual vehicles. We're proactively selling. But I think the most important thing for your partner community to know is, as good, or you may or may not think I'm interesting or not, but the most important thing is what I tell even our leadership is, our sales guys I don't close business. It's our customers that close the business for us, because that reputation is, okay, where have you done that? And we list 5 customers. They call all 5, and then that's basically what closes the deal. So those are the things that you have at your disposal, along with the resources, around contract management, around service evolution, around delivery, that become part of an extension of your sales efforts.
Yeah, that's great. Gabby, do you have any questions or anything that come through?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Talk a little bit about, I pulled this slide up, talk a little bit about kind of, some regards, state government seems a little daunting to me, right? Yep. A little easier, and I think about my county maybe. But talk a little bit then about, K through 12 or education. What are some of the ways that we think we could help partners either get into that space, or what are some of the big things they need to be looking for in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. And you highlighted one of them. So I think the 2 kind of easiest ones to get in from a procurement flexibility perspective are really the quasi-governmentals and the higher education institutions and the large urban K-12s. And in higher education, our references are just as deep and long-standing as they are in state government. So Morehead State is Northeast Kentucky, and basically, as they were looking at how do we continue, we're a state-funded school, how do we continue to be or get more viable, reduce our cost, modernize our services, how do we serve our student population as well as our academic population better? They came to the determination or the conclusion that it wasn't building contact center infrastructure. It wasn't building unified communications. It was focusing on those education programs that made students workforce ready, that made them more valuable in the marketplace. And then their goal was to find service providers that could deliver those infrastructure services as an extension of their capabilities. We really started with Morehead State, just taking over their VoIP systems. So it kind of started with dial tone, right? Your academics, your dorm room facilities, et cetera. But we earned the right. We basically, through the successful delivery of that, we earned the right then to add on collaboration and web conferencing. So then they started to use, WebEx and room units to host virtualized sessions as well as on-premise sessions. And then we moved into wireless or network as a service, starting in the dorm rooms and then overall campus-wide, and we create more green space. And the very unique thing about that isn't necessarily that we did that. It's we did that, and then when COVID hit, and all of a sudden you go from, hey, we're recruiting for the summer class into the fall classes, to everybody go home, teach from home, learn from home. Morehead State was ready. They were ready to basically be able to mobilize their teaching instructional units, as well as support the students wherever they sat, whether they were in Kentucky or in other states, to be able to ride that kind of that meshed and backbone to create these synchronized classroom environments, and then ultimately, be able to get through the the spring and the summer session. And because of our partnership, we actually help them get their students back on campus faster. Of course, there's things like contact tracing and all of those other kind of technologies, but because they had that underpinning technology available, it allowed them to switch gears very quickly and adapt very quickly to the changing environment. And that's really where we continue to focus. And to your point, Matt, universities, this is a public 4-year, a private 4 years are very great. We have very great examples with that, and there's a lot less procurement scrutiny on them, and they have the same challenges as large R1s and limited budget. So a lot of times that's an easier point to target and have success with early on.
That's a great story. I know we've done a big Wi-Fi deployment. I didn't realize it was an extension of our experience with Moorhead, that just grew through there. That's great.
Absolutely.
We're kind of getting to the end of our time here, but I did want to talk about, you mentioned kind of how collaboration tools are becoming more kind of job specific, business outcome specific. And we've seen WebEx do a lot of interesting new things around some products. They're just announcing now their WebEx Legislate, their WebEx, their virtual courtrooms. And I thought that might be an interesting thing to talk a little bit about, as our partners possibly make be able to see some opportunities in these spaces. Talk a little bit about some of these new products from WebEx.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly legislate, it's a different branch of government, right? You've got executive branch, legislative, judicial. So the great news where Cisco is focused on the WebEx side is really around the executive branch and around the judicial branch and then the legislative branch. So we mentioned before kind of that connected justice model where, whether it's a PUCO hearing or it's a unemployment benefit hearing or it's a criminal case, the need to be able to connect the plaintiff, the prosecuting attorney, the defending attorney, the judge, the translator, the transcriber, kind of together, no matter where you are, becomes very advantageous. You're forced to do it. It's actually been mandated by many states to say you have to enable your courtroom to be able to do these things. So Cisco has driven kind of that easy button to connect that software to allow for those type of capabilities. And we're seeing a lot of traction. There's a lot of CARES Act money associated with it, HEROES Act money with it. And what we're seeing is, early adoption of these capabilities. We're seeing winners and losers, like the state of New York unemployment benefits. They've been a user of this. They virtualized their courtrooms, 3 years ago. They've become kind of the beacon that other organizations are driving. We do this in the Commonwealth. We do it in Indiana, in Ohio. But it's an easier target because they have their own budget. They do what they need to do, and there's a lot of money that flows with it. So, I could get more into the technology, but I think for if it were me and I'm on the other side of the table, I'm looking at who has a need, who recognizes they have a need, and who has money. And certainly judicial, corrections, even addiction services are places that child services, child support, child abuse, you're seeing rises in cases of addiction and child abuse and spousal abuse. Well, to be able to handle those case management activities as well as the court proceedings, that's where Cisco is investing, and that's where we're finding the most success.
I think it's fair to say you and I have been around Cisco technology and selling it for quite some time. In some regards, people, I think, thought of WebEx, Cisco WebEx, as kind of a boring product a couple of years ago. And they have really been making some changes. We had a webcast before this one, how the new WebEx for BroadWorks client is really bringing a new teaming and UCaaS experience that simply wasn't there, right? They're having to compete against Microsoft Teams. And so they're making changes. I know the price point on WebEx now has come down into the Zoom range, right? Which wasn't possible 6 months ago. So I'm excited about WebEx's work, not only in meeting the teams, meeting a price point, but then to see them start to make these purpose-built, modules, whether it's Legislate, like if I remember correctly, the U.S. Senate is now using Legislate. And so these tools, connected justice, et cetera.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, right? Cisco has shed the whole arrogance associated with, and let's call it what it is. They've shed the arrogance associated with our product, great, just buy our product, and recognize that that they've been undercut, on a price point, and now they're investing in it, and we're well positioned to take advantage of that, and we are taking advantage of that.
All right. Well, we're kind of at the end here, but I wanted to give you kind of an opportunity. I had a question for you. I know that you have quite a few people on your staff. You hire new salespeople. What would this could, as I mentioned earlier, it could be kind of a daunting task to think to get into some of these areas. What advice would you give to a new hire you had about how to start to break into a county, or what kind of new advice would you have to somebody joining your group?
Yeah, I would think I would start with understand what our capabilities are, what our references are, right? Because that'll drive your strategy. Whether it's at higher ed or it's at the transport or the airport authorities, kind of understanding what our capabilities are, what our references are, and then really kind of focusing in. So for me, any new hire, state government, that's a long sail. Unless you've got, we do have existing contracts we could leverage. I guess that would be the third point, tying into understanding where we have contractual vehicles to sell today. That can shorten the cycle, certainly avoid the RFP process. But then really look into it really start with those 4-year private educational institutions. Always hit the transport authorities, the airport authorities. Those are underserved libraries.
Yep.
Not all libraries, just the large urban libraries and the larger urban K-12s, and just kind of understand what it is their challenges are, because most of them are in that same bucket of we're behind and we're just keeping the lights on. So how do we help them leapfrog into the future? But those are the areas I'd go, just kind of understanding products, understanding our references, understanding our contracts, and then focusing on maybe a multi-tiered approach to get the easier procurement groups moving as you work in parallel the longer procurement cycles.
Okay. All right. Well, Tim, thank you very much for this time here. I hope this has been useful to the partners. I want the partners to know that if you've got any kind of inkling of an opportunity across these kind of markets we've talked about here, I and Tim's team are, absolutely ready to help in any way that we can explore those and see if there might be something we can flesh out for you. Our next group that we're having up next week, we're very excited about. Gabby kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. And this really came from a conversation. We asked Kevin Murray, our CIO, has been our CIO for quite some time, to meet with our internal salespeople and give them give their internal salespeople a presentation of kind of what's it like to be a CIO. What am I looking for in the relationships with vendors? How do I like to be talked to? And we found some interesting insights that I hadn't thought of. And some of you as well might know Dustin Leak, who's the CIO for our healthcare practice. How we met him is he used to be the CIO and CTO for Health First, a 10,000 seat hospital that we sold, and he decided he'd like to come work for us. He sent our CEO a 20-page letter asking to come and build this practice. So we thought both these folks might be able to share some insights about, how do you break into the C-level? What are some of the new messaging that they're wanting to see? What are some of the changes post-COVID, things like that? So hopefully today's been useful. We're excited to have you join us next week as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Thank you, Tim, for taking the time. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you.